Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pete Reilly. Welcome to Bridging the Gap from AI Hype to Real World Impact. So let me give you a little setup of how we sort of plan this session. I'm going to just do a few slides on AnswerRocket, just so you sort of know who we are and sort of where we're coming from. And then I'm going to jump in. I got like a 1-minute video, just again to give you a little bit of context. And then the rest of the conversation, my goal was to have this conversation with Mike, who's our CTO. And if you didn't see his talk yesterday, definitely go back and check that out. But my whole goal here was to hopefully leave you guys with some ideas, some concepts that you could just sort of take home and start working with to really get benefits from all that hype around, especially large language models. And so, if that sounds great, we'll just continue. And so, I'm Pete Reilly. I'm one of the co-founders, along with Mike, and the Chief Operating Officer of AnswerRocket. Been there since our founding, which was in 2013, and responsible for all customer-facing activities.
And thanks, Pete. Mike Finley. I'm the CTO for AnswerRocket, and I've had the fortune to be involved in AI for a good number of years now, from before the deep belief nets and all the sort of the blooming of AI that we've seen in the last few years. And I've had a chance to see the AI winters that people talk about, and in 2008, I was fortunate enough to be the keynote speaker at a large conference around AI and some of the newest innovations at that point, and got involved right away with the thing called autoencoders back about 12 or so years ago, that started to show that machines could look at data and figure it out on their own, and that was kind of the beginning spark. Some work by Jeffrey Hinton. There was a beginning spark of what we see now as these generative AI models and all the excitement that there is around them.
Thanks, Mike. So a little bit about us. So AnswerRocket, we talk about ourselves as a Gen AI analytics platform. Formerly, I think Gartner would have put us in sort of this augmented analytics space. We're sort of combining data science and business intelligence and to actually generate insights about what's happening with data. And you can see there are some of the brands. We're used to working with mostly larger brands. AB InBev, Beam Suntory, Coty. CPW is General Mills and Nestle outside of the United States. And so really, the problem that we've been working on it since we started about almost 10 years ago now, which is this idea that what ends up happening in most companies when they're trying to understand, how are they doing, depending on, whatever metric that they're trying to drive, they usually start with a dashboard, and the dashboards are great at sort of telling you what happened, but they really do a terrible job of telling you why something happened. And so generally this sort of vicious cycle starts where the executive's trying to figure out, well, why did sales go down in this region or for this product? And then analysts download data from Power BI and they try to do some analysis, and they might come back with a PowerPoint or something that tries to answer that, and then usually that whole train just starts all over again. It's a pretty maddening cycle, and usually when we show this to our customers, this is my life that you guys are describing. All right, so a very quick demo. I think I said this is about a minute long. And so this is just to try to give you a sense for what we're building and have built at AnswerRocket. This is something we call Max, and the idea is that there's lots of business questions that folks have that are just very natural. You can see by the way, I'll pause it for a second. The setup is the data I have is about pasta sales, in the United States very, very generally. And so you saw the one question that I asked, which was simply, how did pasta do? And this is the kind of question that a business user wants to ask and get answers to, as opposed to, show me pasta sales for last year, et cetera. And then you see the next one, what were the drivers? And you can see here, it's actually analyzing the actual drivers of pasta sales, running a whole model under the covers and telling a whole story about what did drive pasta sales. You can see there at the top describing what's happening there. And then this question, what are the top 3 challenges, is demonstrating not only where are we querying sort of structured data, but also unstructured data. And the combination of those things really starts to unlock some real value for enterprises. And then the final component is summarize this thread for me, where we're actually leveraging the capabilities of the large language model to actually serve a business need to summarize some of those insights. So I know that was super fast. If you want to see more, we'd love to show you more. I was just trying to give you a sense for context and the kinds of things we're doing for the rest of the conversation. So the whole theme here, Mike, is around how do we get past the hype and start delivering value? And so what are some things from your perspective organizations can do to leverage LLMs to deliver sort of a 10x impact to the analytics problem?
Thanks for the question. So looking at a 10x, the way I would start to break that down is to say there are a lot of things that can drive a 2x, right? If you have some successful business process and you can apply it to twice as many of your categories, right? Or if you have some process that's very successful now and you do it twice as much, right? So there are lots of things that can drive maybe a doubling or something close to doubling. But to get to 10x, you really have to do something radically different, right? You have to hit a number of those 2x's all at the same time. And so the way that I think about this, especially as we've really begun applying these generative AI models, is you have to avoid that problem, the classic problem of paving the cow path, right? You can't just keep doing what you've been doing, but try to do it faster, try to do it more frequently, try to do it in a little bit better way. You have to do all those things and more, right? You have to go back. If you're in analytics, you've got to go back to the business and say, why are you guys asking the questions you're asking? Let me see if I can use this new tool because I've got this brain in a box now. How can I apply that brain in a box to the problems that you're facing? If you have OKRs for the year and they say that the OKRs is to always have all the data on time, generative AI is probably not going to help you get there. That's debatable. We could talk more in detail, but that's an OKR you can pursue without generative AI. If you have a different kind of OKR, which says, I'm going to drive profitability for the business, I'm going to drive expansion of categories, I'm going to drive improvements across channels. These are much more business-sounding problems, and those are the ones that you have to face when you're looking for these kind of multi-X kind of analytics.
Yeah, I would say, I've seen similar things as we've talked to our customers. I'll talk to some folks who are talking about, we're gonna leverage LLM to be able to answer questions like, what were sales by month or something like that. And I definitely see there's much significant value in sort of trying to go back to the business folks, get to that higher order question. Why are you asking that question? Well, the reason they're asking that question is because they're trying to line up to the goals that you were talking about. I'm really just trying to figure out how am I doing and how can I hit plan and how can I drive these top level KPIs. So we definitely see that. So going back to that higher order question and aligning with the business, I think is critical. So shifting gears to more, and I'm sure a lot of people here are sort of playing around with LLMs and developing with them and so on. How, and you've been developing for many years, how has the development paradigm shifted for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question because I don't know the answer. I don't know the final answer yet. It's still shifting, but it is a fun thing to think about. So a lot of the folks that were here yesterday that I was out at our booth talking to are going through master's programs in analytics, and they're learning how to do all these really interesting kinds of analyses, whether it's looking at outliers in distributions or trying to find the drivers of anomalies or causal analysis, all these really interesting things. What I find really curious is that we've got a very large software development industry that doesn't ask them to do that work. You do get to do a little bit of it, but you spend most of your time in the last mile getting pixel perfect outputs, right? Getting the table to look right, getting the font right, getting the anti-aliasing, the positioning, the PowerPoint, the PDF. So that last mile is something that is really standard across all companies, right? Getting it to be pixel perfect and look professional is not something that we should be coding every time individually. And it is something that the language model is really good at doing, right? These models are coding now. They're not just sort of spitting out text the way we see it when we use ChatGPT. You can get them, using Copilot and other tools like that, you can get them to actually write some of this kind of last mile code so that the analysts, the people that are coming out of school or that are working in your businesses doing the analysis, they can focus on that instead of focusing on running the report again or making it pixel perfect. They can focus on driving new kinds of analysis and introducing new ways for the solution to work, overall and get that value delivered much sooner. Another interesting one here that I get a lot of people coming up to me and asking, is Max just writing SQL for me? Because, man, I'd really love to have something that would just write the SQL automatically. What a great idea. And I kind of have to roll my eyes at that because imagine if you said if every question from the CEO of a company had to be answered by a single SQL statement, right? It's a little bit laughable. Like you'd either have a miles-long SQL statement that would say 42 at the end of a very long period of time, or you just have something that would take too long to run because it would be inefficient. So the idea of getting a language model to write SQL to answer questions, it's it's probably a good sophomore in college kind of exercise, but it's not a business problem. It's not a business problem because there's no way to verify what those results are. Instead, the language model's job is to first understand what the user wants, contextualize it, because that's another great capability of these models, contextualize it in terms of what the business is and all the things that affect that. Like if you're asking about growth, well, what period of time is it? If you're asking about channels, well, what are those in the business? Then turn that into a plan for what data do I need to pull? And then once that data is retrieved, what analysis needs to happen on it, right? So there's a number of steps. At some point, yeah, sure, there's going to be a database query, and that has to be done correctly. But that's not the solution to the problem. It's really got to be thought of as a bigger part of the overall solution. And so I see that the paradigm not being the introduction of automatically generated SQL, but instead it's the paradigm of the planning for how to perform analysis being aided by the machine.
And obviously, LLMs are notoriously non-deterministic, right? So how about in the software world, you're dealing with these things. What are some of the lessons you've learned around testing?
Right, so the non-determinism. So it's a fair question. Like we would say, in a traditional programming sense, even in traditional machine learning, the answer is supposed to be 12, and you compare it and see if it's right, and then you know that the algorithm was correct. In the case of language models, they're much more human in their nature, right? We train them on 1 trillion tokens, right? That's like saying 1 trillion syllables of spoken language. That was their training for some of the models that are popular now. And so in that training, they've learned to do certain things, and they haven't learned to produce the same answer every time. Because why? Well, because people don't answer the same every time, right? If I ask a colleague to give me, the last year of sales, should they choose 2022, or should they go 12 months back from now, right? Which way would you answer that question? There's ambiguities in language. It's kind of famous for that, right? So there isn't a right answer from a language model. There are wrong answers, though. Obviously, hallucination is something that needs to be detectable in real business solutions. So we have to allow for multiple right answers when we're testing. We also have to draw the hard line on avoiding hallucinations and be able to measure, in that way. And so it becomes a lot more of a process of using the machine to check itself and giving it the rules for what's correct, and essentially making it a partner in solving the problem of how to produce consistent and valuable results.
And you started talking about this, hallucinations, pretty famous sort of issue and risk here, right? We can talk a little bit more about that, and what are some of the other maybe watch outs and limitations? And then I'd like to get into what are some of the sort of surprising and unexpected benefits that you've seen.
Okay, so good question. So more of the watch outs. Well, a simple and easy one is the models are sometimes unreliable, right? You're counting on infrastructure, and sometimes the infrastructure fails. Ironically, this is not too different from when we were first connecting to databases, a few years ago that you and I both remember. And so you just kind of got used to saying, yeah, sometimes the database is down, somebody will get it back up. That's the same thing that's happening now, but all these years later, they're very reliable. And the same thing's going to happen with these models, right? They're going to become cheaper, faster, more reliable, and better at what they do over time. You do have to watch out for some of these characteristics. variable answers, the hallucination problems. But those are very predictable in many ways, and solutions like Max learn to leverage them. I like to think more about the flip side of that coin, which is what are the unexpected benefits, right? That are out there that we sort of didn't expect. And I mentioned that idea of training the machine on 1 trillion syllables, and I think everybody's sort of aware of this because you hear it in the news all the time. But basically, language models were trained to look at a bunch of syllables. It's called a context window. So it's some number of they call them tokens, but think of it as syllables. Bunch of syllables, and then it's supposed to predict the next one, right? And by doing that, we get it to generate text, because then you just slide it one syllable over and say, what's the one after that? All right. Well, what that means fundamentally is that it's been trained to understand human language, and it turns out that businesses have a giant trove of value that's locked up in what we used to call dark data, right? It's text. It's the annual report. It's my email stream. It's the notes from a meeting. It's all these different sources that where somebody has thought about information, has summarized it, has put it in a really concise form, and then we park it in the graveyard and it's never accessed again. Well, by good fortune, it turns out we've trained a machine to be able to access all of that data. So really text is data. That's the lesson here. And some of the language model, I talked a minute ago about the obvious conversation value that the language models have. Talked a little bit about the planning value. This idea of being able to index text documents and treat text as data, that's all by itself, that's a 10x factor if an enterprise uses it correctly to be able to drive their reporting.
Yeah, I remember 10 years ago we would get a question like, well, how can you help me analyze this PDF or something like that? And we said, well, first you got to put some structure around it. And now it feels like we're sort of saying the opposite. Like, well, actually, to get value with the LLM, we need to take the structured data and sort of make it unstructured. And that seems to be a key. 100%
right, yeah. In fact, as you're seeing Max, we seem to have lost our screen. Okay, yeah. In the demo that you saw of Max, you saw a question coming out, and then Max is answering with facts and information about the business. And how did we do that? Did we connect Max to the database? Look, the language model only understands text. So if you want it to know something about your business, well, you have to give it text about your business. And if you just dump 1 million records into it, you've exceeded that context window that we talked about, right? Like I was talking to the kids here yesterday about, how long do you normally study? Do you study for 18 hours straight? And they said, no, we study a couple hours and then, go to sleep and then take the test. That 2 hours, that's your context window. We all have one. We can only learn for so long, and after that, it kind of comes in one ear and goes out the other. So the language model has a context window, 16 to 64,000 syllables is the window. That's as much as you can feed it about your business or about the question that you have. So what Max is doing is really identifying the information that's needed to answer the question, taking that structured data from a SQL query or from a DAX query, from an API source, whatever the source of the data is, and turning it into unstructured data, turning it into text, because text is what the model understands. And so if we just fed it individual records, Sally bought shoes on Thursday at 2, Jimmy bought socks on Friday, it's not going to be able to make very interesting conclusions out of that, right? But if you give it information that's been thought about by an analysis module, something that traditionally you would have just given that output to the business, like a dashboard, but instead you give that output to the model, then it can answer questions in a really interesting way and in ways that people aren't used to doing themselves.
Thanks for that. We only have about a minute or so left, but how should folks, I know that was a lot of information. Would love to follow up with anybody else that's interested in going deeper here, but how should people be thinking about analytics use cases?
Yeah, it's another great question, because it's a lot of people ask me, is it an IT project or is it a business project? Is it a CEO initiative, or is it something we should do in the skunk works? So the right answer is a Goldilocks. Unfortunately, it can't be something too big, because then it takes a long time and it touches a lot of points. It can't be too small or nobody cares. The right answer is an existing problem that's taking a lot of human effort on a recurring schedule. If you're not spending money on the problem now, it's not a real problem, right? If you have it solved in a way that everybody's happy, then again, it's not a real problem anymore. So we're looking for things where humans spend a lot of time synthesizing, creating outputs, preparing decks. And if you can identify those, and if there's a brain component to it, if there's a thinking component to it, then using that as your very first automation target for a Gen AI project is absolutely perfect. You'll see unexpected value at scale delivered very quickly for the business.
And then finally, I guess just to try to summarize and any other closing comments you have, Mike, I think as we're talking to folks, and look, everybody's trying to work with this and trying to figure out, should I build something, should I buy something? And there's probably some combination of both depending on the use case and the value to your organization. So we'd say, look for the higher order questions. A lot of folks that we're talking to are just trying to figure out how to automate their SQL queries. There's a much higher order question that you should be going after and you can solve with this technology. Obviously, get started. If you're not started, you're behind. You need to get started now. And then as Mike was just talking about, go deep into a use case. We're talking to a lot of folks that are trying to broadly just, and we're going to put an LLM on top of all our data. And I can promise you nobody's going to use that. You're going to waste a lot of time on it. But at this intersection of sort of a departmental level analysis that's done on a regular basis, there's enormous value to be delivered. Reducing the effort it takes to do that analysis, and more importantly, reducing the time it takes to make good decisions to drive the business and advance the business's goals. Anything else that you would?
Yeah, I would just say, look, the businesses that use these models are going to eat the businesses that don't. Get started. Get started sooner than later. Obviously, be concerned with all the ethics issues of the training. Be concerned with privacy. Those are very real concerns, the hallucination. But those problems are going to go away. The models are going to get a lot better, a lot faster than you think. The future's very hard to predict normally, and with the language models, it's even harder to predict. What you're going to learn now from the models that are out there is going to set you ahead when the next models arrive. So you're going to be more ready for it when it does, and it's going to be a great journey for people that jump on now.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. If you have any questions, we'll be around. We'd love to chat with you.